Welcome back to the Johnny Vedmore Show on today's News Talk TNT. Yes, that interview with Ben Habib was very good. I enjoyed it very much. My last guest up today is last but not least. He's Project 21 ambassador Richard Holt, a political consultant at Sirius Campaigns with over 2 decades experience working on campaigns for local, state and federal offices across the United States. His work and opinions have been cited by major media outlets such as RT, Fox News, Washington Post, Washington Times, etc., even Teen Vogue. You can find him on X at the Richard S. Holt or by going to SiriusCampaigns.com. Thank you for coming on the Johnny Vedmore Show. Richard, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
I'm very happy to have you on. You're a guy who does a lot. I'm very interested. You started becoming involved in politics as a teenager in the mid-90s. How has the political landscape changed since then?
Oh, well, that is a very good question. It's changed quite a bit. When I first got involved, Gingrich had gotten a lot of Congress elected through the contract with America. We were still surviving through our memory of Ronald Reagan having been president, and this was before 9/11. And the political party was very different then, as we've seen dramatic changes in the conservative movement since that time. And so, yeah, it's like a different movement. It's a different country in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of, remembering the past, that sort of I think as I asked you that, you thought about the past, and I think that youthful exuberance you used to have came back into you just for a second.
It did, just for a second.
Just for a second, but we got to face facts. Is the American left becoming more communistic in nature? And should regular Americans be worried about their internal stability as Democrats lurch further left?
Yeah, they're not more communist now than they have been. They've been pretty consistent. Even with the fall of the Soviet Union, it was just a minor trip. They got right back up, and all those agents and operatives and setup that they had throughout the Cold War just continued to function at the universities and corporations and so forth. They have gotten a lot more powerful as the corporations and the elitists and the CEOs have become more authoritarian. They fall more in line with the left-wing agenda, and I think that's something that we really need to be frightened of and worried about as state power has increased. And that's probably the big danger. Is they couldn't have a communist revolution, so they are using private businesses, private corporations, and the educational systems to create it. By force, using being very Republican about it, using private corporations to do it.
Yeah, it's amazing what's going on in the world right now, I have to say. And they do seem very fluid in their tactics. They're willing to use any tactics to keep power or gain power. It's quite enthralling. It's dramatic to watch from an outside observer. But as if America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. Well, none of us are really outside observers. And is the United States funding the war in Ukraine, or are they in fact funding European social programs by proxy of military aid?
Yeah. The best answer to that is yes. And I think that was a big part of the blog post that I wrote, was that the idea is that the Europeans are living it up on American tax dollars. I think the average taxpayer spends $2,000 a year of our tax dollars per family goes to European security. So of course they have trains and they have great healthcare and they have all these things, because I love Europe. I go there when I can. But there's a reason that their streets are safe, and it's because we're paying for it. 3.7% of the American GDP goes to pay for European security, and they're supposed to pay just 2% of their GDP, and they can't even do that. Germany got close at 1.3. And so the idea is that I love Europe and I love supporting people who need our help, but at some point there's a breaking point. If they don't believe in investing in their own security, why should we believe in investing in their security? If they're so safe that they can only spend 1.3% of their GDP, obviously there's some threats that existed in the past during the Cold War that no longer exist. And we can all move on and take a look at other things, rebuild our military and spend that money at home. And the $60 billion plus I know is significantly higher that we have spent waging war on Russia using Ukraine as a proxy has been devastating, not only for us, but our global prestige. And we've murdered an entire generation of men on both sides of that conflict are now gone. And I can't help but to wonder, how has America benefited from this?
Yeah, most definitely. And Ben Habib, who was on last, who's a British politician, he stated, we're giving money to to India to help with their social programs, and they've got a space program. So I mean, it's not like they necessarily need that money. It's just we give money
Yeah.
away for different reasons, and there might be other hidden reasons behind why they get these monies. Now, the war in Ukraine requires economic support from America to continue. Will this change if Trump takes office?
I believe it will, but as you know, Congress controls the budget. There is a scenario where Congress decides to override his veto and continue to send money. I don't think it's likely, but it is entirely possible. And I don't want to pretend like I'm against foreign aid. This military aid spending is in complete contradiction. They don't believe in their own security, so why should we pay for it? I fully support increasing the State Department's budget, for example, because there's a lot of things that they're involved with globally that are really important, and they help create stability. They help feed people. I think there's things that we could argue about that are generally good, but they're not $200 billion to destroy Russia good, right? Where
Mhm.
it's significantly less, and it does significantly more good. It's a net positive for us, not a net negative.
Yeah, Blodders in the chat wants to just point out that Europe has much higher taxes than the US, and it's the EU, not Europe, is what they say. And that's a fair point, but I mean, we're talking about that we each got to have our national interests at heart, and Europe does seem to be extremely well supported already in their own by their own states, let alone needing extra funding coming in. If America does start to withdraw financial support from Ukraine, if there's, the vote in Congress eventually stops the support for Ukraine and they begin to push for peace talks, will Ukrainians ever trust Americans again?
They still trust us now. They have a history with Russia. They saw them as the enemy before. This has solidified it, and they see us as being people who help them through a difficult time. They don't really see the role the U.S. has played in putting them in the situation that they're in. And I learned this when I was volunteering at the border in Poland to help refugees as they were coming across the border, and they kept thinking. They said, "Thank you. You're an American. Thank you so much for what you're doing. It means so much to us." And I bit my tongue. I didn't want to say, "Well, it's our fault. You're screwed right now." But of course, it's not 100% honest. Russia could have made a different decision, but but their failure to recognize the role that the U.S. has played in putting them in the middle, I think, is I guess it's good for us that they don't see it that way for relations. But at some point, someone's going to remember that they were stuck between these two big powers. And it's too bad.
Mm-hmm. Yep, yep. Well, are the neocons still in charge of the American war room? And if so, how can they be dislodged?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. The military-industrial complex, even Eisenhower was warning us about it as they were organizing after World War II. And I'd say they really settled in by the time Johnson became president. And they began the war machine in Vietnam, and then they continued around the world through Central and South America. And then we've continued to wage crusades throughout the Middle East for the 80s, 90s, and even through today. And so entrenching them is going to take a major movement. I think there is a possibility that Trump will do so. When we even had a left-wing candidate, Kennedy, if we can still call him a left-wing candidate, advocating for an end to all these wars, these needless wars around the world, that says a lot. And it's not like our defense industry has to necessarily go away. I think they're just an arm of other people who want us to be a global empire. And they've made a lot of mistakes over the last 30 years, and the chicken's going to come home to roost. And the question is, do we have the good sense to slow them down and go in a different direction before those chickens come home with nuclear weapons?
Indeed. And in 2020, the US defense budget was almost $800 billion. Couldn't that sort of investment at a federal level help change American society almost completely, or at least for the better?
Yes, it absolutely could. Just the money that went to Ukraine could have gotten every homeless veteran a two-story home. There are things that we can spend our money on besides arming countries around the world for conflict. And so there's always a good excuse. There's plenty of good things that money could have been spent on. And it is a frightening idea that they would rather spend them on bombs to kill enemies who aren't a threat to us. And again, if these people were a threat to us and they were out to get us and they're on their way to American shores, spend the money you got to spend. But that's not what's happening.
Yeah, no, indeed it's not. And Dark Commission from the chat has asked a question. He likes to ask about the federal government in the US. And he said, considering the influence of foreign lobbyists in the federal government, considering the influence of foreign lobbyists, is the federal government treasonous?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. I think John Learmeyer, if I said his name correctly, has wrote a book about the AIPAC lobby and how so many of our government officials are more loyal to Israel than to the United States. And I think there's an alignment of a lot of foreign interests. I wouldn't say that it was necessarily as sinister as, well, maybe AIPAC doing what they're doing is protecting the interest of their country. And so I can't fault them for that. But you can fault our politicians for agreeing that their country and their security is more important than ours. And I think that is something that we should be concerned with, not just with Israel necessarily, because we have there's a good argument to be made on both sides of the Israel issue. But when we're looking at the whole planet, there is significant foreign influence. We even had Chinese organizations funding BLM for a long time. That's the Black Lives Matter movement. Much the same way the communists were training civil rights activists and so forth. That ended up working out for us okay, but the next time it's not. And things certainly aren't working out for us well with this foreign interference. And lobbyists aren't really the issue. It's the foreign manipulation of the media and trying to control how Americans think and trying to push issues from the grassroots. That's where that foreign money is really going to have an impact.
Yeah, agreed again. Immigration has remained a hot button issue for many years in both America and Europe. How can a new or revitalized leadership change the situation, do you think?
Listening to Trump say that we needed more immigration because we need it. We just need to know who they are when they come through the door was definitely a shift in policy. We have seen build a wall, let's keep them out, and now that has turned into, at least from him, that we need to recognize that, yes, we do have worker shortages. We do want to let people in. We want to be the land of the free, but we just need to know your name on your way in. And I think that's going to be, that's definitely taking us in the right direction, because we certainly do want to welcome immigrants. But my particular city, Springfield, Ohio, for example, when they have experienced such a huge number of immigrants have come into town that all the resources have been strained. There's not enough work. There's just not enough happening. And I think we'll recover economically. It was just such a quick surge. And so what we're not really seeing is an adequate allocation of immigrants where they really need to be, which leads to a lot of domestic resentment. The people in my city are yelling at immigrants, telling them to go home, go back to where you came from, and things like that. And that's a scary idea in America, a nation of immigrants. And so if we were able to be more forward thinking and had a state-based migration system and let the states allocate how many immigrants that they could take, how many do they need for which resource, and do it that way, then we would have a much more balanced ability to take in the immigrants and put them where they need to go so that there's not a strain on our system. But because we have the federal government using a top-down approach and just sending buses in the middle of the night to drop off 400 immigrants at 2 a.m., that's created a lot of problems. So it's not necessarily the fact that people are coming here, it's that we don't know who they are and there's not an adequate allocation as to where they're distributed around the country.
Richard Holt, you managed to answer every question to your best, and you remain positive while doing it. Thank you for coming on the show today. I hope we speak again sometime soon.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, anytime.